What a day. And how we are into our fourth roundtable and innovation emerging trends. I am not Dr. Peter Grinspoon, unfortunately. It was very exciting that he was going to be here, but unfortunately, he's ill this week. So it is me. So this is innovation and emerging trends. It's a topic that I'm particularly excited about. And we have heard, we just had the state panel, and I think it was Kay spoke to the importance of data. It's one of the things that we're going to be talking about during this conversation. So it's the importance of innovation and technology in business that is critical. You just missed a shout out, Kay, had you been here on time. But to improve the competitive edge of any business in any industry, and as I spoke to at the beginning of the day, those that are not in the industry just don't have a clue of the critical importance of innovation, data gathering, and the need to quickly pivot when you recognize that need to pivot. So within this complex of framework, so you're about to hear from a panel of innovators, how they're driving innovation in products, delivery methods, the standardization of good manufacturing practices, GMP. We've spoken about the hemp-derived cannabinoids. Coincidentally, they are organically grown and lab-tested products, hemp-derived products from Healer. So we're going to be talking about some of these cannabinoids that we're hearing more about. We talked about THCV, the acid, CBD, CBDA, THCA. And so we're going to talk about how to capture this and the data and analyze it to deliver optimal patient outcomes, and with the unique application of personalized medicine now in cannabis. So I've had the pleasure of knowing these three cannabis industry innovators for a bit of time, and welcome. So I'm going to start off with Mike, who, if you would introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Mike Hennesy. I am the VP of Innovation at Wana Brands. I'm like many of you in the room, what we consider a cannabis dinosaur. I've been involved in the industry since graduated college.
Mike is not.
A little better? Nope. How about now? All right, there we go. I got involved. I had a roommate in college that had epilepsy, and it sort of changed my perception of cannabis from something I used socially, recreationally, to recognizing its use as a medicine. And so I quickly decided to move out to Colorado, got involved at Wana, started off as a courier. I can say to the delivery conversation, there's just not a lot of margin, not a lot of profit in it. Putting equity licenses into the most challenging piece of the industry, I think is a bit of an issue. But moving on, I became the sales director, saw Wana's growth through just crazy years in 2013, 14, 15, saw 500% growth over 3 years, but wanted to get back into science. That's what I'd done in my undergrad degree, and worked with our founder and CEO, Nancy Whiteman, created a new role at the company as the VP of Innovation. And so for the last 5 years, I've overseen a team of leaders in the industry that are working on doing literature reviews, our own foundational sensory evaluations, and trying to put research and data behind the products we formulate to create more efficacious products, from fast-acting gummies to use case-specific products. And in the last 2 years, we've started to partner with academics and researchers from Johns Hopkins to CSU to start doing about as close as you can get to clinical level trials without DEA product as we can, to start to validate the efficacy of products. We want to continue to lead that.
Wow, that's the definition of a true innovator. And it is an honor to be called such a thing. Thank you, Jackie. Great to be here, David Vaillencourt. I'm actually from Massachusetts originally, so it's always exciting. I was talking with somebody, with Dr. Uma last night, and was realizing that the first time I ever spoke about the cannabis industry publicly was in Worcester, Massachusetts in 2018 for it was a C3RN event. So it's great to bring it back full circle, because when I left Massachusetts 14 years ago, after graduating from UMass Amherst, cannabis was not on my radar. Nice, yes, go Minutemen alumni, woo! Love it. Oh my God. cannabis was not on my radar besides, a few times, recreationally, et cetera. My background was in lab testing. And so I did EPA, Department of Defense lab testing. My last real job before going, as I like to say, or, formal corporate job was as a contractor to the Department of Defense in Pueblo, Colorado, dealing with mustard gas and testing it to make sure that it complied with international treaties where we had 186 countries signed on to. We're the last country. Russia actually beat us to getting rid of our chemical weapons. So we were, that was my, ironic, right? Yeah, we're the last ones with mustard gas and the extra agent. So we're pretty close to that, but bring it back to cannabis here. So I had to shave my beard in case we had to put on M40 masks because in case agent leaked out and into the zone because I was in the testing laboratory, randomly drug tested. So cannabis was really not part of my world until, however, I had been exposed to it when I was in New Orleans right before that job with a gentleman from California that had a disposable vape pen company. He had patented a vape pen and was talking to him. He had these really smart researchers out, probably similar to Mike, the Mikes of the world that were doing real innovation with these solventless products, extraction. And I was like, do you have SOPs? Do you, how are you validating the process to know that's safe? And like, guy looked at me and he's the co-founder. He's like, what you're saying makes sense, but this is not part of our world. And I was like, are you even legal? He's like, well, yeah, we're under the Compassionate Use Act in California, MRSA, whatever the heck it was at the time. And so that really piqued my interest. And next thing you know, 2017, I'm still working for DOD as a contractor. And I get on a plane because I met some people in Colorado and showed up in Toronto, Ontario for a standards meeting on cannabis. Sounds like the most boring thing in the world. It is really exciting and engaging. Let me tell you, to argue about words, I guess that's what lawyers get to do for a living, which I never thought I'd, become friends with so many lawyers and appreciate it. But holy crap, this is really important stuff. So GMP Collective, I founded in 2018. Done work in 3 continents now, I guess, technically, with operators helping implement GMPs. But along the road, good manufacturing practices, along the road, we realized that what does that mean is subject to interpretation, as well as back to my question I asked earlier, what is cannabis? It's subject to interpretation. We have to actually define all of this so that we can do research. We have to define what that research should look like because it's not a drug model, but the food products and food ingredients also doesn't work. So that's my mission. And so the other thing about me is I'm the vice chair for ASTM International's Cannabis Committee D37 on cannabis standards, which is part of a 125-year-old organization. I'm a volunteer just like the other 800 people across 30 countries. So it's a labor of love, but as we'll hopefully get into with innovation, it's how we create the future playbook with everybody on the same page.
Thank you, David.
Hello, everyone. Jacquie, thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here with these great colleagues. My name is Cherissa Jackson. I am a retired Air Force nurse of 23.5 years and 14 days. I can actually get it down to the seconds.
Who's counting?
Who's counting? I am a survivor of 4 deployments, twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan, was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. When I retired from the Air Force in 2013, it was my mission to take away that stigma of PTSD. I call it the chitlet circuit. I was around the country talking about PTSD and showing people how you can still be a great mom, be a great nurse, and still be diagnosed with PTSD. I'm also from the South, so we did not touch the plant. My parents told me not to touch the devil's lettuce. So I didn't know anything about cannabis until a veteran came to me and said, Cherissa, I'm no longer using pharmaceuticals. I'm actually using cannabis for my pain and for my anxiety. I was like, what the heck is that? And so it actually took me being the person that I am to really explore cannabis. And I got my own certification online. And then I went to the University of Maryland MCST program, graduated a couple of weeks ago with my master's because I wanted to be an expert in this field. And the way to do that for me is to be educated on the plant itself. And I'm glad that I did. And again, trying to learn more about the plant, hearing stories from veterans. I was also the former chief medical executive of AMVETS, which is one of the largest veteran service organizations in the country. I did that for 4 years. I was the manager of their HEAL program, touching veterans, helping to save and change their lives. And I was starting to get into cannabis, like, how do I penetrate this veteran community about cannabis? And decided to create my own business called We Decode. And basically what we do is we take your DNA and we're able to help you match you to your cannabinoids and terpenes, saving you time and money. And for a veteran perspective, I want to get them their medicine as fast as possible, i.e. cannabis or psychedelics. And being able to do this has impacted the veteran community so much that veterans are always reaching out to me saying, Cherissa, how can I get one of those kits? And what I've created within my business is a program called Operation Give Hope, i.e. giving veterans hope, where I have companies contribute money to buy these kits for veterans. Last year, Amazon gave me funding. The NBA team, Atlantic Hawks, gave me funding. Martha Stewart actually supported my efforts. And if you look at Cannabis and Tech Today, I'm on the cover of Cannabis and Tech Today magazine. And my technology is also known as the top 50 innovative products in the country for 2023. So been out here really trying to do my best to change the world, to support veterans, and do whatever I can in the cannabis space. That's me.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you for your service. So a topic that we've talked about where the medical market bumps up against the adult use market. Folks refer to it as the recreational market, but what we're seeing more in the adult use market are products with a very high level of THC. And what we're talking, and those of us, the professionals in the industry, that cannabis does not need to equal intoxication. And so what are, and Mike, I'll put this to you first, is that how is Wana addressing this? And if you could first, prior to what Wana is doing and you specifically, your products, is what is the issue with these high THC products? And is there validity in the lab testing? That's another topic of discussion that we had. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to start off a little bit by just sort of referencing back Jordan's keynote that THC is the most well-studied molecule, and its side effect is that it's intoxicating. But most people don't want to be intoxicated while they're using their medicine, which is why it's so important to use titration. But it's also really important for product formulators to think about how they're formulating products, and for retailers and bud tenders to be educated on what the consumers are actually looking for. And what we've seen a move towards is that products are being made with more and more potent products with fewer and fewer minor cannabinoids, terpene content, and they're trying to make them as cheaply as possible. And bud tenders tend to push this volume discount that you can get this much THC for this low of a price. And what that ends up doing is it commoditizes THC while forgetting the rest of the benefits of the plant. And so you end up with less effective medicine, more intoxicated patients, and a feeling about dispensaries that they're a one-trick pony. That's where it's like the liquor store. That's where you go to get high-potency booze. That's what the majority of what's being sold out there. And that sets the entire industry and patients up for a system where people that want to get the benefits or might be able to get benefits from cannabis and don't know it yet aren't incentivized or feel comfortable going into dispensaries. They don't think that someone's going to hear them, understand their needs, and there's not going to be products there that meet their needs. And so I think one of the emerging trends or trends that needs to emerge is the development of products that offer benefits of THC in very low doses and are combining those with other minor cannabinoids that either can reduce the negative side effects or offer their own benefits. So improving CBD ratios, improving CBG ratios, introducing things like CBC, and importantly, looking at terpenes as other ways to improve the medicine's efficacy. You know, we talk about CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. We like to say CBD hits CB2, THC hits CB1. When you really look at the data, almost no cannabinoid has good affinity at the CB2 receptors. They're not strong agonists at it. And those are the ones that are on your immune cells and are involved with inflammation, pain relief. We've heard time and time again today that pain is one of the top reasons people are using products. We should look at terpenes that are full agonists of the CB2 receptor and looking at the fact that that's not going to be intoxicating, but have a lot of medical benefits. And so not only do formulators need to develop these products, like Wana's just come out with our Quick Calm product, our Fast Asleep product, these are all less than 2.5 milligrams per piece. And you find that when you survey consumers, they love these products. They can use them throughout the day. This isn't something that you have to get really stoned wait until after work to use. But then we need to be educating bud tenders and dispensaries to both bring on these products and give them a shot and saying, sure, these cost just as much as a 100 milligram THC product, but they're going to be way more efficacious to your consumers. And when it works, they're going to come back and buy it again. And then educating bud tenders on listen to the consumers and what they're looking for, and don't immediately just start pushing these high dosage bargain discount products, volume discounting THC.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, David, you probably, with the work that you're doing with ASTM, is speak to these inflated THC within the labs.
Yeah. So building off of, to your point and building off of what Mike just said, there's multiple issues with this too that are barriers to changing this narrative. And I'd agree with, I think, most people here that it comes back to education and awareness. And so, for example, I was at the dispensary in Colorado the other day before I left to come back here and saw one product that had the THC value and total terpenes. That was the closest I could get to, are there terpenes in here? Which terpenes? Which terpenes? Because the modulation and the effects are very different. But I still couldn't get the actual list of the terpenes, the terpenoids that are in there. That's a problem. Me as a consumer, patient, can't get that information. You as a physician can't recommend that type of product because you can't find it, because the information, the data doesn't exist, because the regulations or the laws do not require that disclosure on labels, for example, right? So one of the ways that we've attempted to start to solve that is 2020, the US Pharmacopoeia, Cannabis Expert Panel, published, instead of publishing a monograph, they published a great peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of Natural Products that is basically like a monograph on steroids because it has everything of a monograph and the context around it because it's a journal article. Went through the peer review process and looking at looking at over 40,000 data points that they got through their expert panel's work across the US and Canada. They found that there are 5 terpenes that are predominant in cannabis products, regardless, and that there's different patterns and fingerprints based on dominant codominance. And their recommendation, which I then took as a volunteer member of ASTM and turned into an ASTM standard. So now there's an official global standard medical specification for medical cannabis and fluorescence quality. And it requires, for anybody that would adopt it, the disclosure of the 5 terpenes and any other terpenes and cannabinoids that are present in greater than 10 milligrams per gram. If we were to adopt something like that across the country, and let's talk about what is medical. Let's require that for medical products at least, so that folks that are getting medical products can have the access to the basic type of information they need to make an informed decision about which product's gonna keep them up at night, relax them, put them to sleep, help them, focus, whatever it is, because of it's more than just THC and CBD, right? And so this problem has been pervasive because labs, well, if you don't produce a high THC value, you're not going to get the business. As a producer, if your plant doesn't produce the highest THC value, you're not going to get the business. You're not going to get the dollar per gram. So, and the regulators, are maybe this might be this could be an actual law, right? So if the requirements for labels is in law, how can they go through rulemaking and change that? We have to go back to legislation. So we've got all these barriers that we have to overcome in order to solve this, but we can start using these frameworks to address lab shopping issues. And guess what? It's not just a US problem either. I'm on the phone with major LPs and even government labs in Canada, literally government, provincial run labs that are like, we're getting out of the business. We can't do it. You do it right, we have no business. We're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. So we're out because there are so many little issues that go back to standards, basic standards, how to collect a sample, how to even ensure there's representation. What's the variability around a cannabis batch? How do you define a cannabis batch? All these things that require wicked smart people and a lot of different smart people, right, to solve this. But this can be done and we're starting to do it, but we still got a long ways to go to address these issues.
Yeah. Thank you. Cherissa, with the data that you are gathering, and I'm curious as to, are there specific cannabinoids and the profiles, including the terpenes, that are more effective for treating PTSD? And
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good
go ahead.
question. And I'm just pulling up some stats to kind of give you guys some key information about the data that's been collected. The company's been around for about 6 years, and it's has over 6,000 data points of information about your DNA and how it can be used to match you to cannabinoids and terpenes. It's important to know your DNA doesn't lie. So your DNA really is the footprint of who you are. So to be able to use your DNA to say how much CBD, THC, and the terpenes your body needs is so important, because you can now go inside of a dispensary and find those specific products instead of going through months, sometimes even years of finding the right product. And by the time you do that, you're spending thousands of dollars. So I was always thinking, how can I help consumers get to the right product faster and save money? So this was a way to do it. And what we've discovered in all of the data of all the kits that have been sold, that 53% of folks have a specific genotype that predisposes them for anxiety and stress, which can make them have an adverse effect caused by THC. 40% of folks have a specific genotype and has a predisposition for depression, and it can be triggered by THC and myrcene. 34% of folks have a specific genotype and predisposition for insomnia and can be triggered by THC and limonene and pinene. And 10% of a specific type of genotype and predisposition for THC impaired metabolism. So if you know all of this information about yourself and your DNA, it can help you find the right products, even for someone suffering from pain, anxiety, and depression.
And I'm really curious as to that with generational trauma, and that are you able to, with the data that you're gathering, and how deeply can you dive into somebody's race? What's the impact of race? Is there an impact of race, and is there a correlation with gender and race on the cannabinoids and terpenes?
Yeah, we haven't gotten that specific, and I'm just going to be honest about that. Yeah. It's about what you're predisposed for. And within our kits, we're able to give you 5 wellness reports. It's about your predisposition for anxiety, for stress, PTSD, pain, insomnia. Because according to the stats, that's what most people are walking around with. And then this kit actually tells you about your metabolism. It tells you about other helpful information. My goal is to help you understand yourself so you can prevent things from happening. Prevention plus intervention saves lives. So if you know better, you'll do better. And so by doing that, you're able to make more helpful decisions about how you can live your best life by knowing better.
Yeah, and one of the things that those of us that are aware of the science and the variability of the endocannabinoid system that we have day to day, everybody's different. Yeah. Another plug for Wana. You're somebody that first thing in the morning is that I love the Wana products. That I have been told by one of my kids that I have the tolerance of an ant, and so I'll micro dose, and I get 2.5 milligram dose or even less than that. And so how are you teasing this out with your research and coming up with the dosage?
Well, starting in Colorado, 2013, I was around when first sales happened, 2014. The number was set at 10 milligrams per dose. That is not based on any science. It's really an arbitrary amount of cannabinoids that was thrown out there.
Just like this 0.3% for...
0.3% by dry weight. Yeah. These are arbitrary numbers. They're not based off of the genetics of the plant. It's not based off of research on the endocannabinoid system. There's a lot of research out there, as Jordan Tischler knows, but a lot of it is not dose-dependent information. There's really, really poor information on what the dose is per cannabinoid. And really, it's just looking at THC, maybe THC and CBD. And even then, it's measured in things like joints or puffs. Yeah. And back to the point around analytical testing, there's terrible test results. So how accurate is it, even if you know that it says it's 10 milligrams? But it was a poor test result. So we're kind of still at square one on what the right dose is. And I think a lot of people say they don't like cannabis because they've tried a product, had a really negative experience because it was poorly formulated for them. They didn't have this genetic testing. The bud tender said, here you go, 10 milligrams is a starting dose. You get crazy anxiety and it really wasn't, oh, no, marijuana isn't for me. I don't like this. We need to go back to the drawing board and say, let's start at 0.5 milligram. Let's start at 1 milligram, because you could eat 2 gummies. You can eat 5 gummies. It doesn't have to be 10 is the starting dose. And we've started to play around with formulations that are in 1 to 20 ratios, 1 milligram THC, 20 CBD. People are still feeling a psychoactive effect, just not one that's super intoxicating, that's not causing anxiety, it's not causing the negative side effects. And what you end up with is a lot better medicine, because to a lot of what we've been saying here, that psychoactivity is a lot of the benefit of THC. It just shouldn't come along with all the negative side effects. And a lot of that is just generally overuse of it. And then realizing that terpenes, just so what Cherissa was saying, have an important role in that THC dosage. And what terpenes they are and what quantities are extraordinarily important. And we're just beginning to understand and uncover what that looks like. So a lot of what we're doing at Wana is formulating a product, understanding which terpenes we're putting in there, which cannabinoids, and then starting with sensory evaluations. And it really is getting as large of a group of people as we can to provide validated feedback, not on just the taste and smell, but the effect. Was this energizing? Was this sedating? Were you lethargic? And really run through all the positive and negative outcomes and better understanding that. This is what pharma would do, but again, we don't have access to these DEA products. So doing true clinical research is hard. Really, the best we can do, even with all the funding we want. Let's say we've got clinical research programs and grant programs like we do in Colorado, which is one of the very few states that a researcher can apply for state-level grants. They still don't have access to DEA licensed cannabis. As long as it's Schedule I, it's going to be behind DEA labs. And so the best they can do is observational research. And so that really prevents us from asking questions about how a product works. You can't do a intervention protocol. You're not allowed to blind someone to a Schedule I drug without getting it from a DEA lab. So really you have to say, you're already using products in market, and you have to query them and ask some questions, but it's not the gold standard that we're looking for. And I think this comes back to, why are so many clinicians and physicians skeptical to the data? They haven't seen the data they're used to reading. They haven't seen the randomized controlled trials. And so I think we as an industry, we as doctors should work together to formulate the best studies we can given the environment. And then we need to work with all of you that are working with the legislators and doing the lobbying to work on rescheduling this, to work on methods so we can do more research. That's how we're going to get the clinicians on board, how we're going to get the physicians on board.
Please.
So I love what you're saying there, Mike, and I would take it a half a step further and go outside the box that we live in, which is, and I'm going to use that in the terms of the FDA's boxes of clinical trials, randomized control trials, is that's built for a single molecule, right? For an API drug. There's a great botanical guidance, drug guidance for the industry that the FDA has published. That's, I think, almost 10 years old now as a guidance document. And then they more recently in January came up with their final guidance for cannabis products for research, or cannabis, derived products for research. But 80% of the world has traditional medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, complementary alternative medicine, whatever you want to call it. That's a different framework. And we're part of the 20% that does not. And this is a botanical product, right? This has variability. It has multiple components. To try to say THC is the active ingredient and everything else is the inactive, does that? Well, we're saying right now that that's garbage, and nobody would disagree with that. So can we parallel path this and actually start and come together and develop a protocol? Let's look at Australia. Let's look at New Zealand. Let's look at other nations that have developed these frameworks, because even the FDA has said, we need a new framework. The state regulators are like, help us figure this out. We're not the FDA, or, some of us are just in Department of Revenue. We're law enforcement. We don't know anything about health and safety standards. So we can all come together, and it would benefit the industry immensely to create a framework that could actually work and not be an $800 million price tag over, 10 years, which is probably in the low end for a clinical trial, but is also not the dietary supplement that we talked about earlier, where we have Decode, which was passed in 1994. Only reason why I wore this tie, and I'm glad you brought it up, where we produced dietary supplement, a framework. We need a new Decode. I don't know how else we get around this without creating a new framework that will allow us to have access at the level that we need.
Please.
I would just like to add, and I'm glad Wana is doing this with their microdosing, because my first experience going to a dispensary, I was excited. Man, I get to get some cannabis. I've never had it before. And this bud tender sold me, first time out the box, a 40 milligram THC product.
Whoa.
I was like, okay. He was like, you have PTSD? I'm like, yeah, I have some anxiety.
Oh my God.
I have some insomnia. And he was like, okay, and you're a vet? And I'm like, yeah, oh, we got this veteran discount. This product just so happens to be on sale today. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna get some good sleep. I haven't had sleep in years. I was maxing out like 4 hours of sleep a day. Don't know how I was surviving. So I got home, took a shower. I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be the best experience ever. Took that gummy, and let me tell you, it was the worst experience of my life. For days on end. And I said to my boyfriend at the time, I'm like, look, I need something. I mean, the VA is not helping. The over-the-counter medications are not helping. And it took a girlfriend of mine that was already in the cannabis space. She was an educator. I reached out to her. I'm like, yo, I took this gummy. And she was like, how much was in it? She said, never mind. I'm going to come over. I want to see this thing. She looked at it and she was like, oh my freaking God, Cherissa. You do not need 40 milligrams of THC. This was before school. Okay, so this is me, novice, 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago. And she was like, you do not need 40 milligrams of THC. And I was like, so what do we do? And even as a clinician, I should have known better. But it was this bud tender that just sold me a bill of goods about how much sleep I was going to get, how good I was going to feel. And it was her that told me how to titrate back off of that 40 milligram gummy. And I'm so glad that she did. And I say all this to say that education is so important, because imagine how many people out here is having the experience that I had. I would have stopped. I wouldn't have gone to school. I would have said, the heck was this? My mom and dad told me to stay away from that devil's lettuce. I should have. Right? And I'm glad that I didn't. And I gave it another shot. I gave it another opportunity. And I just don't want anyone out here that's really needing this medication for medicine to have to experience that, because it was the worst experience of my life. So I'm glad, Wana, that you guys are doing it, because had I started with 2.5, I think I would have had a different experience, and I probably wouldn't have had to go through those days of really coming off of that high that I was on. So I appreciate you guys for doing that.
Yeah, I have a saying, friends don't give friends gummies. That I have an attorney, lobbyist friend in Maryland, and I had just come off the water, unmedicated myself, and Jackie. And I just had a gummy, and it's hit hard. But yeah, it's just at the danger. I mean, what we're weaving through every single conversation, and it's in my tagline, it's education. We're talking about education, what Dr. Tischler does, and we just cannot stress enough the power of education and the need. And this is, again, where we're bumping up the adult use against the medical market, and the need for states to demand, and truly, I say there's the there's the regulation, and then there's compliance, and then there's enforcement, and that does not always happen. But that gets me off of my public health education tangent. So with terpenes, and Mike, you guys with Wana and have a recent study on the bioavailability of terpenes, and you speak to that and what's come out of that?
Okay, so this hasn't been published. So I'm going to just talk around the subject a little bit, but we've done an animal model study. So terpenes, we know that they bind to your olfactory receptors, your olfactory bulb, and there's a lot of research on things like linalool, that it can be relaxing. We know that essential oils have objective effects. And then the question is, do they work in edibles? And a lot of people have said an edible is an edible is an edible. I hate indica sativa hybrid, but you know what? It is sort of trying to classify that certain chemovars, terpene varieties have different effects. And does that happen in edibles? And so we did an animal model study in Israel. And what we found is that, yes, they are. And they're showing up in nanograms per milliliter. So it's not a lot, but that's how you measure THC in the blood. It's nanograms per milliliter. And that certainly has effects, pharmacological effects. So we haven't now validated pharmacological effects, but I'm going to just throw out some theories and ideas here. One is that Ethan Russo and others have put out plenty of research on the variety of receptors that terpenes are binding to, from TRPV receptors, PPAR receptors, and even cannabinoid receptors like CB2. In some senses, terpenes bind better to certain cannabinoid receptors than even cannabinoids themselves. You could probably call some terpenes cannabinoids. But then the other thing I think is really interesting is this idea of olfactory receptors. We know that the olfactory bulb, terpenes really bind there. They are scent molecules. Well, your body also has olfactory receptors throughout its non-nasal passages in the organs. And so these could be thought of as chemoreceptors. So the same terpenes and scents can bind to olfactory receptors. They're called ectopic olfactory receptors that are in the kidneys, in the liver, in the gut, in the intestines. They are all these G protein coupled receptors, same type of receptor as a cannabinoid receptor, causing big downstream changes in things like mood, inflammation, appetite. And so when we think about how cannabis is working, it's a lot more than just the cannabinoids. And I think that terpenes have the opportunity to cause a wide variety of effects that are just widely misunderstood and not understood at all. So I think it's a huge area for research on the mechanisms of action, the outcomes of action, and how to best formulate for these types of products.
Cherissa, with your with the data that you're gathering, how about delivery methods?
Yeah. Again, what was so important for me is to educate people on what's the best route of administration. And that comes with learning how you metabolize the product. Like me, even though I took that edible, the test told me that I'm not a really good metabolizer of an edible. So now I've switched to a tincture. So when we educate our patients according to the results, we make sure we tell them what type of metabolizer they are, and then they can decide which route of administration is best for them. So why waste money on edible if you're not a good metabolizer of an edible? You may need a tincture, or you may need some type of flower or something like that.
And then drilling down, and then we were talking and about these new novel cannabinoids, and whether they are CBG, CBC, THCV, CBN, which I've heard oftentimes is, that's when you leave your THC and, bud, you find it in your sofa, and that's your CBN, but it's being marketed for sleep. David, do you have something to speak to that?
Well, so I think really important what you just talked about there, and building on what is cannabis. So what, route of administration, if you're eating, are you consuming it? Is that turning into a first pass metabolism and, and converting into 11-hydroxyl? And then let's just pause for there. And, for folks that aren't scientists in the room are like, what the hell are you talking about? And then you go to the consumer, you try to explain this. So that's the reality that we're operating at, that we have to simplify this down. And then you add in, are you using nanoemulsification? Does that increase the bioavailability? And now gummy can have the effect of a 5 milligram gummy from a different brand. Have we asked those questions? And then again, how do we convey that to consumers? But then to your point, and I'll throw one more chemistry challenge, people's ways to stretch the brain on this Friday afternoon is, as we look at, synthetic Delta-9 THC.
Yeah, we're going to go there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got these new minor novel. Well, is Delta-9 the same? Is all Delta-9 the same? There's 4 different flavors, as I like to call them, to keep it simple, of Delta-9. The cannabis plant produces 1 in a dominant, variety. There's 3 other ones. And why does that matter? It's about the hand, left hand versus right hand. Why does your left hand glove not fit on your right hand? That's stereochemistry right there. And that's where about my brain ends with chemistry. But the point to bring it back to, and you look in pharma, this is a big freaking deal. The left versus the right one can mean the difference between binding to a receptor and being toxic. And if anybody's heard of thalidomide in the 50s, that's the problem. So if we're not asking these questions, you send it to a testing lab, cool, it's Delta-9. Great, check. You need really advanced, about $2 million of instrumentation to be able to disentangle those 4, and then we don't have standards to even produce that. So that's the whole other can of worms with these minor novel cannabinoids, and even the ones in the plant that we're not actively able, from a commercial scale, back to the labs, what's the incentive for a lab? They've got to get a 7-minute runtime down. They've got to get as many products through to do this type of forensic work, requires a much longer runtime and method development. And if Wana just says, and I don't think this is you guys, but you're sitting on the table here, so let's use it as an example. You produce a unique product and then you send it to the state lab to get tested. If they don't have the capabilities to test what you want to produce or what you've made, then it doesn't exist. And that's a major problem that we have to continue to overcome as well. Pause there. I don't know who else is on the minor.
To follow up on your last point, I could send a Wana gummy to any registered lab in any state, and they're going to come back and tell me there are no terpenes in that gummy. But we can feed it to rats, test the rat's blood, and find terpenes in there. So there's something wrong with the testing methodology at labs. And there's no commercial reason for them to develop one when customers and manufacturers aren't asking them for it. Why is somebody going to go spend time and money to develop something when the state's not telling them, I'm not paying them to do it, and consumers aren't asking for it? Yet it's highly relevant to the product formulation and for clinicians to know what their patients are taking. And if you go and take this test and then walk in and want to try a Wana gummy, which terpenes are in here because I should avoid myrcene? Oh, there's no terpenes in here. Well, yeah, there are terpenes in here. There's just not a testing lab to test for them. So that's failing the patients. That's failing the consumers. You know, that's a major issue. So as we both formulate better products, bring in new minor cannabinoids and terpenes, we have to work with labs and state legislators to find ways to test for it to provide accurate results of what's in those products.
How about the additives that are going into the products? That I remember the first time that I walked through a processor facility, and there was a barrel of terpenes, and so I looked at it and I thought, all right, here's a product that's been sitting in a metal canister for who knows how long, and then it's going to be added into what theoretically is a plant-based product. So what's the effect? And what are the challenges?
Sure. Additives. I mean, we were just talking about drug delivery systems or nano. Everything is nano this, nano that. Nano is like a terrible word for a wide variety of different compounds and surfactants, emulsifiers, proteins, starches, all kinds of different things that are added that may or may not work at encapsulating or may or may not work at improving drug absorption or bioavailability, bypassing hepatic or first pass metabolism. They're doing all kinds of things. And it's all called nano, and everyone's nano is the best. But the fact of the matter is a lot of these are like new to science molecules that we invented this molecule. It attaches to CBD and it improves bioavailability. I have no research on the PK of it. I have no safety data, but hey, it works. There's a lot of that out there. And, the FDA would require, if you wanted to do this, and the FDA would require pre-market research to show safety before it was approved. And right now in cannabis, it's not required. So there's tons of products with really unknown molecules in them. And I think a lot of companies haven't done their due diligence to say, what are you putting in there? I'll just speak for our products to say we worked with a product that is GRAS, already a food ingredient. You find it in commercial kitchens right now, and then we process it with commercial equipment, food equipment. And so it's something that we feel very confident and safe in the way that it's working. We didn't go with something brand new, even though there's so many of those out there. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's great. Thank you. Cherissa had something to say.
Yeah, I just have a personal story about that and testing and making sure you actually know what's in a product. And I asked my girlfriend if I can tell their story, and she said yes. Her daughter suffers from epilepsy, and this was in the DC market. And she actually went to a dispensary to get a product for her daughter. And the daughter took the product. A few hours later, the daughter started having some cardiac issues. She called EMS. She had to go to the hospital. She was in the ICU for 4 days. This is a 12-year-old in the ICU for 4 days. So the mom started thinking she didn't have any issues before she took this product. So she had enough sense to say, let me test this product. She brought the product up here to Boston to have it tested. The product was laced with ecstasy.
Whoa.
So she right now is like, Cherissa, I'm going to grow my own product for my daughter because I don't believe in any testing system out here. It's not regulated because how come my daughter, this dispensary that I trusted, I was sent to this dispensary to get this product. I trusted this product and my daughter was in the ICU for 4 days. and it was laced with ecstasy. And not only did she come here to Boston to get it tested, she took the product to Colorado just to make sure before she declared a lawsuit against this particular dispensary. And sure enough, both testing centers came back saying it was laced with ecstasy. So we need some real testing protocols in place to avoid and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and right on to your story and your point is that, again, with Maryland going adult use July 1 and for medical patients to be able to grow their own. And it was really interesting. We posted with TPAD and CannabizMD why you buy your products from a regulated market is that testing. And it was really interesting. The pushback that we got from the legacy market is that we know where this is grown, and where that goes. Well, we know that the scientists have studied this is what how cannabis, the plant, absorbs all sorts of toxins from the soil. So, David, you got that mic and you're eager to say.
I just have to add, I'm like, you kind of lost for words with that because that's a reality, right? That's just insane, an insane reality that we live in 2023 that you just described. And it's so unfortunate. And there aren't even words to describe this, right? Look at Canada. The folks I've been working with in Canada talk about this from a credibility issue where, to your point, with the unregulated marketplace, in Canada, 50 to 75% of cannabis products are purchased on the illicit market. And the argument of testing, products are safe because they're tested and it's in a regulated market, we've just blown that out the window here. You bought it from a dispensary that is a, quote, legal framework and had this issue. We have a lot of work to do because now we're not just competing Trulieve versus MariMed versus Wana versus name your small craft company. We're also competing against the illicit market. And it only takes one of those stories and lawsuits to go from the one half a step forward we've taken as an industry to 5 steps back. And now we're continuing to fight this. So if we don't work together to address this with real testing programs, preventive controls and mitigating controls, which is what GMPs are all about, so that you can de-risk your operation to know that by the time you get to a final product testing, it's just a formality. And that you also know that you should be looking for things that you think has some probability of being in there. If we don't know what chemicals you're using, what surfactants, what reagents you're using, how do we know what to test for? We have to kind of retool this framework from test for the 4 heavy metals and 9 residual solvents. You've got to look at what could be in there.
All right, I want to start to wrap it up before we have questions, but Cherissa, starting with you, is that what do you think we're talking about new delivery methods, and is there anything that's coming out of the data that you're gathering that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I would say for Decode, we are most excited about just pushing the technology out into the community. It should be the baseline for not only novice users of cannabis, but for folks out here who are not getting the efficacy that they've been trying to get and spending money and wasting money. So for us, it's important to do the education. So we have an affiliate program that we just launched 2 weeks ago. And with that affiliate program, we're bringing on clinicians, we're bringing on doctors, pharmacists that can look at this data and be able to better educate their patients using the data coming from the DNA test. So we're really excited about that. And from the doctors and the nurses and the clinicians who are coming our way, they're saying the same thing. I want to be able to educate my patients better, get them to their medication sooner, and this will help them do that. So that's what we're most excited about.
Excellent. Thank you. David.
Yes.
What are you talking about innovation and emerging trends? What gets you excited besides chemistry?
Oh my God. What gets me excited? Honestly, what gets me excited is I'm going to give a plug to CANRA, the Cannabis Regulators Association. Mm-hmm. And they, again, health departments, law enforcement agencies, they're finally all coming together. They have an annual conference where they bring in trade groups, they bring in nonprofits, and they're working to initiate conversation outside of the silos to figure out what do we need to do to fix and improve, because it's been over 10 years that we've had programs and we're still here struggling with the basics. So I'm really encouraged to see groups like CANRA, groups like ASTM, US Pharmacopoeia that are science-driven voluntary consensus standards to come together and harmonize the industry. And I'll give that with a plug that at 3 a.m. next week, East Coast time. Yeah, I
Can't
know.
wait.
1 a.m. for me. Do I stay up late or do I get up early? Yeah, who's going to be there? Don't worry, it'll be simulcasted after, be recorded. Myself and Nandu Sarma, who is the Director of Dietary Supplements and Herbal Medicines at the US Pharmacopoeia, we're co-leading a conference, a workshop virtually online, 2.5 hours we've got a professor from South Africa, we've got the Thailand FDA, we've got
That's
Australia,
fantastic.
and we've got the World Health Organization to talk about medical cannabis. So just getting people in the same room to talk about this, isn't that huge, right?
Yeah.
So it's those types of things. It's CannabizMD, bringing folks like us all together to have real conversations. Then we have to go to the next step. We have to put pen to paper. We have to work out these issues through a process to create a framework that we can all be on the same team, because we all care about public health and safety. Nobody wants to be the DuPont or, name your company that's been part of major lawsuits. We don't want to be Philip Morris. What's that? No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So let's not do that, and let's fix this before it's too late. I think there's a real opportunity here.
Yeah, and just a plug on that, I'm with CANRA in my hometown in a couple weeks in Annapolis, Maryland, and it was really interesting, man, that to see momentum in public health departments. I've been very, very disappointed, but I had an opportunity to speak at a public law conference, public health law, whatever it was, maybe a year or two ago, and that the public health officials, assistant AGs, are coming up and asking, and it's in the market. We've got, as we've been talking about all day, the access, whether it's legal or illegal, people are using it, and it's to me, it's kind of horrific that there has not been a better job of the public health agencies doing their job. So Mike, what gets you excited? Innovation, emerging trends. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you. How about let's talk about an emerging trend that's not very exciting. We've been talking about it all day, and that's the intoxicating hemp products. That's the holes in the farm bill. So there's this dry weight basis. A Wana gummy weighs 4.5 grams. So 0.3% of a Wana gummy, that's 13.5 milligrams. That's more than I'm legally allowed in the recreational THC market in Colorado. If I make a beverage, I could have 50 milligrams in there. And that's perfectly legal. And by the way, it's not regulated. But that's not the worst of it. Obviously, we've been talking about D8, D10, D7. And let's say you're a state regulator and you're like, well, we just need to put regulations in this. We just need testing in place. The problem's a lot bigger than that. Because without diving into the science today, I'll just mention that when you convert CBD to D8, it's an equilibrium reaction. It doesn't go one way, A to B. It goes A to B to C to D, and these other things. And they're all kind of in equilibrium between D9, D8, D10. And then to make matters worse, you send it to your lab. They run it through an HPLC. This is basic lab equipment for analyzing cannabinoids. And it'll come back and it'll say it's 90% D8. Well, if you were to take it to an academic lab or to a very fancy lab and you put it through something called a GCMS or something called an NMR, these much more expensive tests, much more expensive pieces of equipment that most cannabis testing labs don't have, will come back and tell you there's actually 17 different question marks in there that I don't even know what those are. They look like D8, but they're different. And no one's ever seen them before. And so you are selling to your consumers something that they think, even in a regulated market, which it is not, you're still selling them something that is brand new to science, no one's ever put into their bodies before. And so that's why the FDA was formed. We just saw a presentation on what happens when you take stuff that you don't know what it is. Well, you end up with an FDA. So even with proper testing, if you're not talking about the cannabis plant and what you can extract from it, once you start putting that into a lab and you make brand new molecules, there is a pathway for legalizing that and showing that it's safe. And we can hate on the FDA, but they do a good job at it. Thalidomide is one example, and it's used all the time because it was a time something slipped through the holes. But generally, it's a really good way to show molecules are safe. I have no issue with D8. I have no issue, and I think there's probably a lot of therapeutic potential with new synthetic cannabinoids that target receptors better, that have better shapes. But let's make sure they're safe. We know that this plant is safe because we've used it for 5,000 years. But that thing made in Joe's garage, we don't know what that is. So anyhow, I'll leave it with that.
Right? Thank you. Yeah.
And that came from a company with a lot of money.
A lot of money.
All right, well,
cannabinoid receptors.
Thank you. And open up the floor to questions, and you have your hand raised. Was that?
It was, yes.
Yes.
I have my hand raised. I have 7 questions, but I have unfettered access to David because he lives in Colorado. So, no, talking about these, and we as a company, and I am very pro-testing. I know, and I think most licensed operators are. You've got a lot at stake. But again, if it's not put into the laws, like it wasn't in Arizona until implementation on November 1st, 2020, you're not going to do it because there is no lab in which you can't do it. Going back to kind of tap onto your earlier question, we want to be good actors. When we increase and better the testing, we're going to increase and better the price. Not better the price, increase the price. Better the price for the labs. And then we're still going to have the lab cheating problem. But more importantly, instead of that cost being passed on to the patient, my fear is the patient says, screw it, I'll go back to the illicit market. And so I think that the comment is there's a balancing act, and I don't know if we have an answer on how we rectify that, but I think it's something we have to talk about so that we keep people inside of the regulated market.
I can share. So there's a group that I work with. I work with too many groups, but that's another problem for another day. Find me some help. The National Cannabis Lab Council is a group that I work with, and they're just an informal group of labs and people associated with labs. And they're actually working with a major LIMS producer, which is a laboratory information management systems company that has access to 45% of the lab data across the country. And they're actually going through spreadsheets right now. This will be peer reviewed and published and shared with regulators and open access, probably unfortunately about a year out, but where they're looking at indoor versus outdoor, product type, modality, state, seasonality, what's there. Every state is different, 13 pesticides, 31, 74. The point I'm getting at is test smarter, not harder. So if we see out of 75 pesticides, we see that 9 have shown up with some frequency, and there's another 5 that have shown up like 3 times in Arizona, then maybe we should test in no other state, then maybe we should test for those 12 in Arizona and the 9 everywhere else. And then we should do a spot check program where we do a random surveillance program, which is basically validation in the FDA's world, where you test for what there could be a risk for, a probability of being in there. And then you do a random surveillance, essentially a forensics test where you do the deep dive once or twice a year at some less frequency so that you can just verify that things maybe haven't changed and slipped through the cracks. That's a more mature model we can get to, but we need that data, right? So I'm really excited to see groups actually put forward for no money, the goodness of their heart to provide that anonymized data so we can do something with it, which can, I think, address your issue. Yeah.
I think the other thing we can do is improve the consumer experience way above that of the black market. Right now, most products are THC products that get you as high as possible. Your dealer down the street will sell you that all day long for a lot cheaper than we can. So let's improve the product experience by testing more, providing test results on accurate cannabinoids and terpenes, matching that with data about that person, and then speaking with their clinician on what they should be using. And so that when they go in there, they're going to have a much better experience, pay a premium price to get a consistent product that's going to meet their needs.
Yeah, thank you.
Follow up with one. I'll talk loud. Does every state allow or require that COAs are available for?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jeff, you had a question in the back there.
Yeah. I'm curious. How do you think that we finance the research that it would actually take to demonstrate the health benefit of shopping the regulated market versus the illicit market? Because I formed a nonprofit to do this, and I do shelf testing of products in Massachusetts. And I'm approached by no end of people who tell me how important it is. But I have so few donations.
You put your money where your mouth is. Well, I've spent $300,000 this year alone on research. And that's just how Wana is approaching this. I think a lot of companies need to start following suit, but it's hard. The industry is in a tough year.
Yes.
And so we're talking about research, and right now people are losing their jobs. Businesses are closing down.
Yeah. Yep.
So, it needs to come from government, from grants at the federal level. Obviously, the Biden administration has said he wants to see rescheduling that will help with research. But it's also going to take the industry to sort of get back on its feet in some ways, because a lot of it's going to have to be self-funded. That's what pharma does, and that's what we're going to have to do as well. I hate to say it, but a lot of people don't want to go fund your question about your product. There might be some foundational research happening, but most of that's going to be funded by NIDA. Until we see changes in how government spending is allotted to research, it's going to come from NIDA. It's like 98% of the funding. The other like 2% is Colorado. That's pretty much it. There's some at the I forget the name, but yeah. Anyhow, it's going to come a lot from the industry and the brands and the manufacturers to do that research.
Thank you. And Michelle, do we have anything from Zoom?
There's always that discussion about adult use and home growing. So the question is, how can we meet home growers at their level in order to educate them in a way that helps them grow cannabis more intentionally, i.e. a better quality, specific cannabinoid, terpenoids, flavonoid composition? Are there any programs that are out there that will support the home grower in creating safe, effective products?
Well, I'm going to give a plug for CannabizMD. We're going to start doing that. So we are. And anybody on the panel, if you have an answer for that one?
I would say I look forward to what you're talking about, so I'll keep posted on that. But
yes.
In the meantime, right, there's great books out there on how to grow cannabis. I think of it as a CSA model, community supported agriculture, or folks that want to grow lettuce in the backyard. I mean, I lived in New Orleans, and I remember folks in the lower 9th Ward wanting to grow just vegetables and herbs, and then having a nonprofit that had to educate them not to grow. Why? Because it's laced with heavy metals, because it was an industrial area, and cannabis, perfect example of being a phytoremediator. So these are barriers to entry that folks don't realize about, but we should be allowing home grow. We should be providing education. There's extension, programs through, ag schools where a lot of resources exist. It's just helping communicate that and make it more easily accessible to those home growers.
Yeah.
God, what a concept.
Maryland
Some
has
government funding for this, to pool resources.
Well, what about growing plants? And I'm like, well, here are the risks. But the best thing you can do is whenever you get done growing it, take it to the lab. We're talking about $6.
But let's also just build on that crazy Colorado, right? Well, back to when things were new. What do we do in Colorado? You cannot, as a consumer, bring your products to the lab and test them. That's illegal because you're not in the track and trace system.
Yeah.
And the idea, again, at the time, 10 years ago, made sense. If you allow, I'd say logically, you could make the argument that if you're a home grower, are you really just disguised as an illicit grower and you're going to bring your product in through not the track and trace system, test it, and then say, hey, my product's tested and it's safe? Those are antiquated things we have to fix to allow something as simple as that.
And then this is the last question, and wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm holding the mic, so can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I just, we talk about all this testing, but we haven't even gotten into route of administration issues with vaping devices that are leaching heavy metals and, those types of things. So, here we go. Testing. Hello.
Yeah.
October, there'll be a 2-day online free workshop on all contaminants, 2-day workshop.
Which association?
Okay, so just borrow a word from David's submission earlier on harmonization, collaboration, networking. I see it this way, that when it comes to clinical practice, when it comes to promotion of cannabis, cannabinoids, when it comes to advocacy in this country, so many groups, so many organizations where is the harmony? Where is the collaboration? Where is it's because I spoke to you earlier on, Dr. about how to be part of the cannabis specialist, cannabinoid specialist. I know there is other organizations and all of that. I'm thinking, how can we get to a point of collaborating, having one body when it comes to clinical practice, that when it comes to standards, when it comes to various smaller sections of the industry, looking at the whole value chain. So just throwing it out, not just for the panelists, for everybody. And finally, to Cherissa, I was expecting you to use the opportunity to market your company and all. I had to go Google it and all of that. I know you spoke generally about it. I don't know whether there was a restriction on it didn't come out clear as to how the product is, how can I have access to it? How do I even talk about it? I mean, I want to help promote a sister's business, right?
Yeah, of course. And I want you to. I really do. But I wanted to keep it within the framework of the panel. So we can certainly have a sidebar conversation about that. I appreciate that support.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm wrapping up a day of conversations, and this is, I mean, to your question, is it's events and programs like this where we come together. You know, we are all like-minded. We're in the cannabis industry. Perhaps we need to bring people who are not into the cannabis industry and bring those folks in, and that's one way that to help remove the stigma that we're pushing hard against. And you know, I'm taking some notes, or took some notes on the highlights of the day. Is there was a very lively conversation that we had on cannabis use disorder. One of the things that we talked about in our intro Zoom were new product deliveries. We're not talking about suppositories and how effective suppositories are, not just for women, but treating GI issues. And, you know, those of you in the room that have cannabis companies, you're missing a mark on the size of the women's health market. Deschedule, and the impact does it take it out of, it does not take it out of the purview of the FDA. Technology, and we've talked about it certainly on this panel, but it came up over and over again. We're talking about with telemedicine and the lessons learned from COVID, the necessary engagement of the medical community. That's something that Dr. Tischler is focused on, CannabizMD is focused on. Others of us in this room are to get to our healthcare providers and deliver that education. One of the questions that I have is, in how I know there would be pushback. I've seen it within the state of Maryland of who could be a recommended provider, but you know, why aren't we requiring 1 hour of CME of every physician, every prescribing healthcare provider? De-integration, breaking the chain. How did Massachusetts? And that's why we're here, as lessons learned from Massachusetts and coming from Maryland. And why one of the reasons I wanted to come into to Massachusetts is that I know that as policymakers, policy influencers, we've been studying Massachusetts for those lessons learned, Massachusetts being the first state in the country to include social equity provisions and how successful they are. And you know, the next state is Maryland, where it has failed. And we're going to see now on the third try how successful social equity initiatives are. And that goes to equity, which is a great segue into TPAD, which is, let's see if I can. Oh, well, go back to thanking my sponsors. So again, thanking Trulieve and Laura Niehaus and your support, Wana Brands. Again, the work that Wana is doing that is enhancing our lives. Foley Hoig, the team here, the facility. I've enjoyed watching planes land and looking out at the what just absolutely spectacular, and the team here that has been so supportive. So the folks from Foley Hoig, very grateful. And of course, a big shout out to the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy and the Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics program. Got a lot of great representation here. And I want to thank all of you for being part of the day. And this is, again, having this educational and necessary conversations, the mission of TPAD, and I'm trying to come up with, and that's our contact info. And this is what it's all about. With TPAD, it isn't where you came from, it's where you're going that counts, from Ella Fitzgerald. And TPAD is a nonprofit that I founded to have very necessary, provocative conversations. It's live jazz, good eats, plentiful libations, and provocative conversation at every TPAD. The last 48 hours or 72 hours, or I think for the last few months planning this program, talking about collaborating and bringing folks together. I've had a lot of pushback on what coming into, unfortunately, coming into Massachusetts. And my intention here is to raise awareness of the inequity that we have in the cannabis industry, and these conversations that we have, that we need to have these provocative conversations that are uncomfortable, but that's how we make change. So what we do with TPAD, it is a 501c3. We are particularly focused on advancing women and people of color in cannabis STEM. And what we're raising money for is a TPAD fellowship program that will provide a foundation of cannabis. It's a 12-week program providing 3 weeks of cannabis science and policy education curated by CannabizMD, developed by folks like myself, Emily, those of us that have these unique degrees in medical cannabis science, including MDs, PhDs. There's a bunch of us that were working on this. And so what the fellowship program will do while the folks are in the fellowship program, they will be receiving a small stipend that is supported by TPADs. Like, we're going to be going into the other room. Folks, invite you to join us. Again, CannabizMD, and then our corporate partners and private donors. And the goal is, following the completion of this, the fellowship program, where folks will have a paid internship earning $17 an hour for 8 weeks, that they'll transition into a full-time job. And that's what TPAD's all about. CannabizMD, I'm very proud. We have a very unique, it's unique to Maryland, a grant. It's called an EARN grant. It's focused on workforce development. We are educating folks how to be trimmers. They receive $500 that will offset childcare costs, transportation costs, these barriers that folks have had to getting jobs. And so workforce development, and they'll be employed in the industry coming out of our education program, again, focused on earners. So earning $17 an hour, get your foot in the door in the industry, and hopefully transition up. And that's our mission. What we're all about is breaking down barriers to entry into the cannabis industry, empowering access and advancement, no matter gender or race. Everybody's welcome to join us next room. It's the live jazz, good eats, plentiful libations, and provocative conversation that we're going to have. And why I talk about jazz being such an integral part of TPAD is that it was TPADs were weed speakeasies in the 20s and 30s during alcohol prohibition. And when the prohibition by Anslinger started, which we've talked about it, our federal drug policy is totally based on racial prejudice. And it was the music and lyrics that came out of the TPADs that are the foundations of the civil rights movement. And so that is the connection that I found with the focus of mine is truly creating equity in the cannabis industry. So thank you again for everybody for joining us today.